Hi folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness, and another review of Star Trek Picard for you today. We're on episode 3 now. The episode is entitled The End is the Beginning. As always with these reviews, if you haven't already watched this episode, I'm going to be heading straight into plot spoiler territory, so if you don't want this episode spoiling for you, please watch it, then come back and watch my review. There's an old adage that you can kind of get the overall feeling for a TV show by its third or fourth episode, whether it works or not, is it any good, will it sustain your interest, etc. And I think it was whilst watching this episode that I started to form my overall opinion about the tone of this show and how I feel about it. I'm going to get back to that shortly, but let's first race through an overview of the plot. I must stress here that this episode jumps all over the place, back and forth from minute to minute, so I've streamlined as many of the separate short scenes into plot chunks to make it more understandable, such as it is. We begin the episode with yet another flashback to the synth attack on Mars 14 years ago. Picard is at Starfleet headquarters and he's still an officer. He tells his first officer, Raffi, who we met at the end of the previous episode, that he's just met with the Starfleet Admiralty to voice his protest about their abandonment of the Romulans to the supernova of their home star system. Picard reveals that he tried to call their bluff by resigning in protest. Instead, they accepted it, and as a result, they also boot Raffi out of Starfleet. We jump forward to the present day of the show, and we learn that these events are the source of the current animosity between Raffi and Picard. Raffi blames Picard for getting booted out of Starfleet. Picard tries to apologise to her and say that he needs to get her help to get a ship to go and find the AI expert Dr. Bruce Maddox. Raffi reveals that she's always believed that there was a Romulan connection to the synth attack on Mars, and that she has evidence that high-ranking Starfleet admirals knew about the impending attack and allowed it to happen in order to justify refusing to help the Romulans. Raffi says that it's a cover-up. Picard wants her to come with him. She says no, but she does tell him that she's arranged a ship for him, commanded by a former Starfleet officer and pilot named Captain Rios. Picard departs, but sends Raffi all of his research about Darj and Dr. Maddox to Raffi in case she changes her mind. At the Daystrom Institute in Okinawa, AI expert Dr. Jurati is visited by Director of Starfleet Security, Commodore O, who wants to know about Jurati's recent visits with Picard. On the Borg cube, Soji is met by Executive Director of the project. It's Hugh, the Borg character from the Star Trek Next Generation episodes I, Borg and the two-part story Descent. Although he was severed from the collective in I, Borg, here we see that he is a functioning individual with many of his Borg components removed. Hugh takes Soji to visit some formerly assimilated Borg Romulans, who are all now seemingly Fruit Loops from their experience as drones. Soji is looking for a specific ex-Borg named Rhonda. Soji starts spouting about a shared Romulan mythical experience which seems to trigger Rhonda. Rhonda says she knows Soji and that Soji is the destroyer and the ender of all things. Rhonda grabs a weapon from a nearby security guard, points it at Soji and then points at her own head. Hugh calms her down. Picard beams aboard Captain Rios' ship. Rios is a cigar-chomping, booze-guzzling hard-ass who's got a buffoon of an EMH for a companion. Bizarrely, Picard concludes that Rios is Starfleet to the core. Meanwhile, Raffi has pored over Picard's research and found a lead to Dr. Maddox's whereabouts. He is at something called Free Cloud. Picard returns to his vineyard to say goodbye to his Romulan house companions when they're attacked by a group of shrouded Romulans. They fight them off with a load of conveniently stashed weapons and Laris' super kick-ass fighting skills. As the fight ends, Dr. Jurati shows up. They question one of the surviving attackers, who tells them that Soji is like former Borg Rhonda also said, the destroyer of everything and will end it all. The Romulan then spits out some acidic substance and he dies. Jurati tells Picard that Commodore O met her in Okinawa and questions her about Picard's mission. She says that she told O everything except that she plans on coming with Picard on his quest. They beam aboard Rios' ship and find Raffi on board. She's also coming along, but only because she wants to go to Free Cloud, whatever that is. On the Borg ship, Soji is in her quarters. She contacts her mom and asks if Darj is okay. She seemingly lies to Soji in telling her that Darj is fine and that she spoke to her just today. As the mum talks, it seems to have a hypnotic effect on Soji and she passes out. She wakes later when her Romulan lover Narek arrives at her quarters. Narek tells her that he thinks he's fallen in love with her. Later we see Narek meet his sister Rizzo. They discuss if Soji knows what she truly is, and Rizzo tells Narek not to fall in love with her. Back on Rios' ship, Picard and his new fam get underway. Picard says engage and the ship goes to warp to the strains of the Star Trek Next Generation theme tune. Now this really is an oddity of an episode in the style typical of those who were schooled amongst the ranks of the JJ Brigade. You get this sense here that there's loads going on in the plot when in fact it's all smoke and mirrors created by frenetic editing, massive chunks of expositional dialogue. Even this dialogue is misleading because it seems to be just a load of repetition of things that were largely established in the first episode and parts of the second episode. And as an experiment, I really must go back at some point over these 3 episodes and identify the key repetitions and how many times they're repeated. I've already lost track of how many times these episodes have reiterated that Dahj and Soji are special, that they have a special destiny, mysterious destiny, or that Picard now seems to hate Starfleet, or that Mars was attacked by the synths, or that Starfleet wouldn't help to evacuate the Romulans, or that the Romulans are involved in the mystery involving Dahj and Soji. The list goes on and on and on. And this really is bad writing. Maybe a gentle recap at the start of the episode for those with a shorter attention span. That's all these writers really needed to do with these episodes. But I suspect that what's happening here is that this script is basically padding. I did a little mental edit of the episode. I was watching it and I tried to strip the story down to its key points. And what I discovered is that there's probably not much more than about 5 to 10 minutes worth of story here in this episode. Furthermore, we're now 3 episodes in, and where we are really in terms of plot, Picard set off on his quest. He only just set off on his quest, actually. We know that he's looking for Dr. Maddox and Soji, but that's about it. The Romulans are involved in some capacity, inclusion with certain parties in Starfleet, but that's about all we know of that. We know that synthetic life forms are a central component to the story, and somehow connects to the Mars attacks, the Romulan evacuation of the Borg cube, but that's about all we know about that. We know that Starfleet and the Federation has changed, Picard isn't happy about it, but that's about it. And this is all we've really learned in 2.5 hours worth of story so far. To sum up, the overall plot of Star Trek Picard, at least this far in, it's thinner and flimsier than a pole dancer's G-string, basically. There really is very little to hide what's underneath it. What we do have underneath is an attempt by Alex Kurtzman et al. To create a J.J. Abrams mystery box style narrative, one that Kurtzman's previous efforts Lost, for example, did this kind of thing, ultimately fell miserably to anything that other than a pile of questions upon questions without giving any worthwhile answers. But we will have to wait and see if that's what we have here, but the signs aren't good at the moment. And I want to make a few observations now about some of the character dialogue in this episode because it's particularly bad. One standout example is when Rhonda tells Soji that she met her tomorrow. What were they smoking with that one? There's also some really shonky acting displayed that doesn't help matters. Particularly noteworthy here is the actress playing Raffi. There seems to be some verbal affirmation of characters from other characters here. Really does stick out like a sore thumb. Real people don't talk to each other that way in real life. Even fictional characters, at least in fictional quality science fiction anyway, aren't generally portrayed as such because it's generally cringeworthy to watch. It's off-putting to the viewer. But we get it in spades in episode 3 of Star Trek Picard. 2 separate characters across a very poor edit of scenes shouting at the viewer that Soji is special but also incredibly dangerous. One scene would have sufficed for that for the viewer, and there are better ways that the writers could have disseminated this information to both Soji and Picard without the scene splitting. There's Dr. Jurati's bizarre line about how she, just like Dahj in episode 1 actually, thinks that Picard is brilliant, will follow him anywhere, even though she barely knows the man. The pinnacle of this piss poor writing is Jurati's line about the one thing that she didn't tell Commodore O, that she plans to go with Picard to find Bruce Maddox. Well, duh. I mean, Jurati already knew from episode 1 that there was something very clandestine going on with Dahj and Soji. If she's as clever and as amazing as the script keeps telling us, she probably would have figured all this out by now, that there's some sort of conspiracy at work here, and that it's probably best not to tell anybody about what you're planning to do. Even if you are, as Jurati says to herself, not a very good liar. But there's this side note here. What's the betting that Jurati is in reality a good liar and she's actually misleading Picard? It appears to be signposted all over the script at this point in the episode. As for the identity politics, which is an ongoing theme here in Star Trek Picard and the Kurtzman era of Star Trek overall, the episode, it's not as bash you over the head as the previous installments, but they're still here. There's lots of female affirmation with the likes of Jurati, Soji, Raffi, Rizzo, Rhonda and Laris, all being termed to the effect of special or words to that effect at some point during the episode. And let's not forget we're treated to another female super fighting skills moment here when Laris saves the day during the attack at Chateau Picard. Laris also calls her attacker a stubborn northerner like you, which she addresses to her male Romulan friend Jaban, who flippantly, whilst this is going on, she flicks the attacker across the forehead. Then we got the scene with Rios and Picard agreeing that one should never argue with Raffi because, well, just because really. She's a woman, she knows better. Men are denigrated here again as well. Narek is clearly subservient to Rizzo, who puts him down by saying that he stinks of Soji. Rios is a failure in his career, constantly reminded about his shortcomings by his EMH C-3PO manservant. Picard's also a bit weedy here, particularly in his 14-year-long disregard of Raffi. He didn't seem to care about the fact that his actions destroyed her career until he wanted something from her. In doing so, this conveys an intentional and less than subtle message that Raffi is a victim of a quasi-patriarchy. Picard also now seems to have an odd definition of what it makes to be a core Starfleet in his assessment of Rios anyway. Obviously the writers think that Han Solo types are the real role model for Starfleet officers these days. Speaking of subservient Starfleet archetypes and Star Trek in general, what's all this business with Raffi vaping on plant fumes? The vape imagery is yet another example of showrunners using 21st century iconography in a fictional future setting that, until now, didn't feature such real-world iconography. Another example is Picard's comm badge beeping and lighting up like a mobile phone. They never did that before. A little bit of canon continuity to address here as well. Laris says that Romulan disruptors don't have a stun setting, but they did in all of Star Trek that came before the Kurtzman era anyway. Maybe they're a plot inconvenience now and have been flippantly written out, but I digress a bit here. Let's go back to identity politics, a big indicator of a sort of social engineering agenda in modern pop culture, delivered in this episode by Soji to Hugh in a scene where she meets with Help Me Rhonda, help me Rhonda. Delivered in a manner more subtle than usual for members of the JJ Brigade, but we get it spelled out by the writers and producers' beliefs about what they're doing with contemporary Star Trek. So Soji talks to Rhonda about Romulan mythology, and Rhonda says that she hates the word and calls it news. In other words, cultural mythology should only be an informer and an educator, not a storyteller or source of inspiration and imagination. That's what the writers of the show are trying to say. There's some alarm bells that should be ringing here when we see the current state of our media entertainment, because it really does get worse. Soji says, I love that. The idea that former Borg might be able to create a shared narrative framework for understanding their trauma, rooted in deep archetypes, but as relevant as the day's news. And those of us who have come to recognise a manufactured proverbial social justice agenda in entertainment media will recognise that Soji's words are an articulation of the exact feelings and the intentions of the writers and producers of current Star Trek. Now, I've been researching, writing books and articles about, publicly discussing the subject on various platforms, the reality of the myriad of agendas actually in science fiction and science fantasy genre. For over a decade I've been doing this now. If you want to learn more about this subject, please check out the wealth of quantifiable evidence that I've gathered in my books, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda, Volumes 1 and 2. And this phenomenon is as old as the genre itself. In the past, it was usually done subversively, sometimes done benevolently and conscientiously, other times it was done for far more nefarious reasons. But either way, it reflected the beliefs and social observations of those who pervade the genre, whether that be the creatives or the money behind the creatives. However, the difference between all that came prior and now is that before it was mostly done through illusion, metaphor, subtle social narratives, commentaries, that sort of thing. Today, it's completely in your face. It's screaming and shouting at the viewer for attention. Secondly, it uses shame, fear, victimization to bash the viewer into subservience and compliance. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, many of the social justice messages that are being conveyed here are either completely fabricated or exaggerated beyond all recognition. That's to say that it doesn't reflect the majority of the real world at all. It merely reflects politicised and agenda-driven ideology shared by a relatively small number of people. For example, I personally know a sizable number of people of different ethnicities and sexual orientations, and they're completely perplexed, and to some extent they're actually angered by this representation in the media. They feel that it doesn't represent them all their lives. Further still, they feel that they do not even need to be, as the media puts it, represented or reflected in fictional media in the way that they currently are. And overwhelmingly, they do not feel that their life circumstances or their choices have traumatised them in any way whatsoever, or turned them into victims, or that they require justice or somebody to blame for anything. And here is where we get to the crux of the matter. SJWisms, for want of a better term, it's designed to create and maintain fear, and that is why the central word in the line of dialogue from Soji has been intentionally inserted by the writers and producers. The word here is trauma, and there's another word as well for it, fear, reflected again by Picard when he waxes about his views of Starfleet, and he says, I never dreamed that Starfleet would give in to intolerance and fear. And that's maintained, manufactured mainstream entertainment media narrative that we currently face in the world. The message and the agenda have smothered the basic ability to generally tell unbiased and thought-provoking stories that fire our imaginations. In the words of the writers of Star Trek Picard, a narrative framework for understanding trauma. That's the order of the day now that we have with Star Trek. Now, I've always loved Star Trek. I'm a huge, huge fan of Star Trek. I have, as I said in episode 1 review, I have all of the Star Trek series on physical media. I've watched them countless times. And one of the things I love about the show is its ability to encourage people to ponder various issues in the world. Episodes like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, The Drumhead, The Outcast, Duet, Far Beyond the Stars, Remember, Author, Progenitor from Enterprise. The list goes on and on and on. I could name so many. Those stories, they were subtle, they were thought-provoking, they always left you to draw on your own conclusions. And yet they could be a little bit preachy at times, but never metaphorically bashed you over the head or backed you into a corner with a proverbial gun to the temple shouting, "You will listen, you will like this. If you don't, we will shame you." That is what they do now. And I'm starting to really see where Picard is now going. And I'm not happy about it. I don't really care about what Star Trek is at this point, because I reached a point several years ago when I proverbially washed my hands of post-2009 Star Trek. But it is sad to muse about what we could have had with Star Trek, especially when we watch a fantastic television show like The Orville, which in everything but name is what Star Trek should be nowadays, I think. Furthermore, what perhaps bothers me the most with the current Star Trek franchise runners, acolytes of the JJ Brigade as I call them, they seem to be going out of their way to stamp all over the past of Star Trek. They did it with Spock in Star Trek Discovery, and I feel like they're doing it now with Picard in Star Trek Picard. All of this is in the name of turning entertainment into news, a daily dose of media trauma. Not satisfied with trashing the present state of science fiction, these people are virtually doing in 1984. They're rewriting the past to suit their agendas and their beliefs and their ideologies. And that's the thing that really gets to me, because I've long maintained that we've reached a point now where the best course of action, actually, with the output of the mainstream media, is just to turn it off. Don't switch it back on again until these things have changed massively. But there are those people who follow my alternative knowledge research, and they will occasionally say to me, "You tell people to turn this off, but you still watch from time to time. Why is that?" Well, the answer to this is simple, really, because one of the things that I try to do is to document the phenomenon, to show people what's really going on, and hopefully to encourage people to reevaluate their relationship with the media. It isn't some sort of crackpot theory. This is a very real and quantifiable phenomenon. It's real. It is actually going on. Some of us may disagree on the finer points of why it's happening, but we can't deny that it actually is happening. So, try as I might, I can't find much about episode 3 of Picard to be positive about. I will make an effort at this point to find something in conclusion. I still maintain that there's the core of a good idea in this overall story, even if it's starting to be stretched a bit thin at this point. It was nice to see Hugh Borg back, plus they didn't mutilate the character for agenda or just in an attempt to be edgy, at least not at this point they haven't done. The music throughout the episode was pretty good, frankly. I found the use of the Next Generation theme, though, at the end to be very insulting to the glory days of Picard and, by extension, Next Generation. So my final rating for this episode, I'm afraid it's a 2 out of 10. And that's it for now. I'll return to Picard next week for a review of episode 4. Apologies to those people awaiting my latest Doctor Who season 12 reviews. I'm really lagging behind with them lately. I could really do with a lot more hours in the day at the moment, but that's the way things go. I'll finish here by saying thank you for watching this video, and for those of you who have supported the channel so far, it's all still new with a very small viewership at present, but I do appreciate it nevertheless. I plan to start changing up gears a little bit soon and get some episodes of Strange Tales and In the Weeds, so I hope you'll check them out when they come along. In the meantime, please remember to like and share this video if you can, and also consider subscribing to the channel if you like the content. Also, don't forget to click the bell icon for notifications of new content as well, and I will see you in the next video.